On May 3rd, 1469, Niccolo Machiavelli was born in the city-state of Florence, Italy. He would come of age in one of the most extraordinary, creative, but tumultuous times in Western Europe. Consider that before he was 50 years old, he would witness the High Renaissance, populated with artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. I'm not talking about the Ninja Turtles there either. Writers William Shakespeare, John Donne, groundbreaking thought leaders like Copernicus, Thomas More. Some of these Machiavelli was personal friends with. It was during his lifetime that Christopher Columbus, Hernando Cortez, Vasco da Gama, Amerigo Vespucci took to the seas and opened up a whole new world. And in the old world, Machiavelli bore witness to such personalities as King Henry VIII, Martin Luther, John Calvin, and lived to see Queen Elizabeth I be born. All those people alive at the same time. It's really difficult, almost impossible, all of these centuries later, to convey the upheaval, the sheer pandemonium of those days. Old Europe, with its medieval superstitions, its divine right of kings and queens, was beginning to collapse. Colonization began in earnest. Exposure to Aboriginal cultures and the realization that the world, the solar system, the universe is much larger than anyone could have ever guessed. The Catholic Church, the one stabilizing force for good or bad in Europe at the time, was in the throes of corruption and reformation, with the emergence of this new Protestant movement was underhand. And everywhere one turned, it was turmoil and chaos at the continental level, not seen again until the 20th century with the world wars. The shape and the structure of the world, gone. The certainty of the church and theology called into question. The rhythms and routines of centuries cast aside. Art, music, architecture, philosophy, all being audaciously and courageously remade. In every single facet of society, Europe was convulsing. Phyllis Tickle said it best in her folksy way, and I have quoted her often. Every 500 years or so, Western culture has a garage sale. We decide what to keep and what to kick to the curb. In Niccolo Machiavelli's lifetime, the garage was emptied. Almost everything had been hauled off to Goodwill or the Path of Grace thrift stores, or sold on the front yard. And in the midst of this, there was this deep, howling, vacuous space of new beginnings. But when you lose your foundations, when you lose your certainties, when all the rugs have been yanked out from beneath your feet, people go looking for something solid. In the chaos, personal and corporate, people will often welcome certainty even if there is a terrible price to pay for it. This Machiavelli understood all too well. He was never a political ruler himself. He was a diplomat. We would call him a bureaucrat. And there in Florence, he built a career navigating between administrations. First for this queen, then for that king, making nice with this pope, and then the next one, circumventing the political system as efficiently and as ruthlessly as Columbus crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Until the game caught up with him. He got caught on the wrong side of a regime change. He was arrested, sent to prison for a year, where he was routinely tortured. The Italians had a name for it, the strappado. The victim's hands were tied behind their back, and then they were lifted at the wrist high into the air and dropped, separating the shoulders over and over again. Niccolo survived the torture, survived the imprisonment, and afterwards withdrew to his family farm outside of Florence, and he wrote his most famous work called The Prince. In this book, Machiavelli took his lifetime of political experience his observations of a world in commotion, and crafted a handbook for the would-be rulers who wished to create stability over their kingdoms and for themselves. He skillfully developed a political philosophy of rulership that would go on to empower generations of European rulers to this very day. He said only two things are really important to the king, the prince, the queen, or the ruler of the state: impero y gloria, power and glory. The easiest, the most efficient way for a ruler to bring stability to a society was to do whatever it takes to consolidate power, to climb to the apex of that power in an act of self-promotion, and to never let it go. I'll read from you Machiavelli's philosophy. A ruler's priority is total power. In this service, deception, lies, revenge, torture, violence, these are all good actions if employed in an effort to hold power and to bring stability to a society. For beastly actions are often required of leadership. Thus, the prince must be both a lion and a fox. He must be overwhelmingly powerful and deceitful in his cunning. In uncertain times, the ruler must show no mercy, for cruelty is the tool of the prince, not clemency. If all men were virtuous, the prince could act differently, but not all men are virtuous. It is unrealistic, sheer foolishness to think otherwise. The prince need not fear this path, for the populace will wink and turn a blind eye to the cruelty of a leader if the ultimate results are virtuous. For political science majors, for those who pursued philosophy, social studies, or history, you know the shorthand for Machiavellianism: the end justifies the means. That is, if the goal is what you want, if the intended outcome is what you view as right, then do whatever it takes to reach that goal, no matter how dirty or how ugly or how corrupt. To avoid lawlessness, break every law if needed. To quiet the protest, kill every protester. To achieve stability, use power unchecked and unrepentant. Machiavelli's little book was immediately banned in Italy and much of Western Europe. But it wasn't banned because the authorities found it contemptible. It was banned because he let the cat out of the bag. It was banned because it was too honest. Niccolo Machiavelli had simply put on paper the rules of how earthly power works. And banned or not, his book, The Prince, became the playbook for authoritarians from King Henry VIII of England to the Saudi monarchy of today, from the House of Borgia to Pinochet, Stalin, Vladimir Putin. And of course, most democracies employ Machiavelli as well, though they would like to say they are more fox-like than lion-like. This history and philosophy isn't an academic exercise this morning. I share it as compare and contrast. Machiavelli was the most deliberate, the most direct communicator in how one can achieve his or her goals as it relates to power. On the other hand, 1,500 years before Machiavellian philosophy, Jesus already knew how earthly power worked. He already knew the way of the lion and the fox, and he called his followers to the lamb instead. For him, it was a radically different way of life that he was teaching. His was a countermeasure, a complete opposite principle, a refusal to play by the rules of deception and domination. His carries the arc of descent, get lower, instead of ascent, striving to get higher. His way is not power and glory. His way is surrender and humility. In the text from Mark 10, today's gospel reading from the lectionary, The Sons of Zebedee, which I think would make a great name for a grunge band. The Sons of Zebedee. They come to Jesus with a private request. And it's almost mafioso-like in the New Living Translation. You see it there, don't you? Hey, teacher, could you do me a favor? That's what they're doing. Underhanded, sneaky, quiet. James and John are two of the young men in Jesus' inner circle. Jesus has already nicknamed these two young men the Sons of Thunder. Another good band name, possibly. They are ambitious. They make noise. They are fiery. They are impatient. They are thirsty for more. They want what they want. And here they reveal themselves to be practicing proto-Machiavellians. They come as cunning as foxes. Privately, they don't want their peers to know that they're making their play. And in the private conversation, their lion-esque request is made known. When you take over, we want to be your second and third in command. We want to be at the top. These guys have got some real nerve. A range of synonyms you could use right there. And it is an audacious plan that they are putting into action. And Jesus is a bit stunned. I think as you read the text, you see that. And He doesn't answer them directly. That's hardly ever Jesus' style. What a marvelous teacher Jesus is. Because as He does so many times, He turns it into a question for them. And in verse 38, He says, "Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering that I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering that I must be baptized with?" Jesus didn't need a weatherman to know which way the wind was blowing. He already knows. He already knew how this thing was going to play out. He knows where his life is headed. He knows it is a cross for him because he has embodied a life of resistance to how things really work in the world. And the tide was already turned against him. He had far more enemies now than friends, and his fiercest enemies were very powerful people. So, okay, you two thunderheads, have you got the right stuff? Can you follow this road where it leads? And without blinking an eye, oh yes, Anna's reading was perfect. We are able. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, so long as we can achieve power and glory. I remember hearing a story about the great Muhammad Ali. What a nickname, the greatest. The greatest. And he probably was the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. A firebrand, a fighter. Before all of this, and just as an aside, my sons aren't here to hear this, but before we got all this mixed martial arts stuff on pay-per-view where people get in a cage, kick and bite and chew, and it was just mano-y-mano, right? Gloves and two men in a ring. I sound like an old man saying that. I'm just complaining about the youth of today. Ali fought Sonny Liston. This is that iconic picture here in the slide. He's standing over Sonny Liston right here when he knocked him out. He would fight Joe Frazier, George Foreman, and he was the heavyweight champion of the world, the greatest to ever hold the title. And it was during this time, or about this time, that Ali was flying cross country for a match. And he was there on the plane. Well, let me say this first. Let me say this. When he was fighting George Foreman is when he came up with his best and most quoted lines. He said, "If you think the world was surprised when Nixon resigned, wait till I whoop Foreman's behind." Talk about a son of thunder. Listen to this. I've done something new for this fight. I done wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. Handcuffed lightning and thrown thunder in jail. Only last week I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick, and I'm so mean I make medicine sick. I float like a butterfly. His hands can't hit what his eyes can't see. Now you see me, now you don't. George thinks he will, but I know he won't. It's about this time that Ali is flying across country for these fights, and the plane is taxiing on the runway, and the greatest refuses to put his seatbelt on. And a flight attendant comes up to him and implores him for his own personal safety, but mainly, we want the plane to get into the air. Please put your seatbelt on. And Ali says, Superman don't need no seatbelt. And his little crew all laughed. And the flight attendant was so sharp. She said, Superman don't need no airplane. All right? You knew that one, didn't you? Now buckle up. And he did. Can you fly, Superman? No. Are you able? Oh, yes, we are able. We want to be the heavyweight champions of the world. Listen to James and John. We want to be the greatest. We want the seats at the highest table in the land. We want to be ranked number one. And by crook or hook, fair play or deception, strong arms or devious manipulation, we will do whatever it takes for power and glory. When they say that, they're really saying something about every single one of us. Because there's something about our nature we all want that. And if you don't believe me, the lesson's only half taught. Verse 41, when the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. The King James Bible says they were very much displeased. I like the original word from the Greek New Testament. It means to snort like a horse or a donkey. It's a snarl. It's that deep, instinctive, animalistic reaction. If you're a Ted Lasso fan, it's that Roy Kent hostile mumbling growl. That one right there. They're baring their teeth. They're not upset. They're not offended because James and John have done something that's inappropriate. They're offended because James and John beat them to the punch. Like Machiavelli writing a little book, it gets banned because he pulled the curtain back on how things work in the world. They're upset because they want those seats, the number 2 and the number 3 in the land. And then here comes Jesus' heartfelt rebuke, verses 42 through 45. Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people. They're bullies, Jesus says. And officials flaunt their authority over others under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. In the other gospel readings, whoever wants to be first must be last. For even, speaking now of himself, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Let's cut to the chase scene. As it was in the days of Jesus, so it is today. You don't need me to tell you that in our world, this country, this society is Machiavellian to its core. Trunk, root, and branch. The end justifies the means. If the goal is what you want, if the intended outcome is what you view as right, then do whatever it takes to reach that goal, no matter how dirty or how ugly or how corrupt. Politics, oh God, help us. Obviously so. From the most local election to the highest seat in the land. In our economies, so long as the shareholders make their money, do whatever it takes. Hurt whoever you have to hurt. On your job, it's cutthroats and stab backs and tattletaling and sabotage just to get ahead of somebody else. How we treat this beautiful piece of coastline where we live. Rules can be bent. Rules can be broken. So long as there's progress and development. And by the way, often progress and development are just synonyms for greed and selfishness. What did Jesus say? You know that the rulers in this world do these things. You know it. Machiavelli didn't have to tell you. Jesus didn't even have to tell you. This is how it is. But then that new part, the revolutionary course correction is that next line, but among you it will be different. It must be. Among you, who? You Jesus people. If you claim to follow Christ, you cannot pick up the tools of this world to achieve an end. The means, be damned. You cannot do that. Among you, it will be different. What will be different? The rules of engagement, the world's way of doing business, getting ahead, or even its definition of winning. It has to be different. And it will be, because to follow Christ replaces supremacy with sacrifice. It replaces being at the top with a willingness to go to the back of the line. It's not obsessed with getting one's way, but with helping someone else find their way. It's different in that the ambition is not to conquer others, but to be in service to others. To live differently is to position oneself in direct opposition to Christ in His way. If we act and behave and plan and do just like the world does, we're sort of back to what your mama always told you. If everybody jumps off the cliff, are you going to do it too? And that's where a world goes when everybody wants the power and the glory. The whole damn thing is jumping off the ledge. But make no mistake, the radical way of Jesus is a whatever it takes ethic too. The way of the world is about self-aggrandizing, self-promoting, self-centeredness, self-indulgence, self-absorption, self-importance at the expense of all others and at the expense of the world itself. But what Jesus proposes is self-sacrifice, self-surrender, self-awareness, self-control for the redemption of others and the redemption of the world itself. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give His life as a ransom for many. This is who we follow. This is the way.